Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we've got a really fun and exciting one for you. It's been a few weeks, but we're jumping back over to Fremont Brewing Company, and we're jumping into a beer that we reviewed maybe the 2019 or possibly even 2020 release. But this year, actually, let me just double check. Yep, this is the 2021 release. This is Fremont Brewing Company's highly lauded Bee Bomb. It is a winter ale, and they do a bunch of different versions of this beer when they release it. It is a limited release. This specific beer clocks in at 13% ABV, and it is the cinnamon and coconut variant. This is a bourbon barrel-aged beer, and they always take this and make this beer as a blend of other beers. So it's a blend of 9, 12, and 24-month-old winter ales to make this one, and then the barrel aging and the coconut and cinnamon additives. Fremont Brewing is based in Seattle, Washington. So a big beer here. This is one I've reviewed before, and it was absolutely fantastic. Don't get a lot of winter ales, especially if it's not in the winter months, but this is one that is just one of those top of the world for its style kind of beers. It's just absolutely phenomenal. Winter ales, kind of almost like a mix of a few different styles. They're bigger, heavier beers. They tend to be spiced. They're going to be typically somewhere in that same kind of color range as a barley wine. Indeed, they do share a lot of commonalities with the barley wine, but it's kind of like a mix of a few different styles that you can get. A lot of it reminds me of a Bock. It's very malty. It's higher ABV. It's got a lot of different interesting flavor compounds that pop out like a barley wine. It's got this high ABV range. So there's a lot to love about a winter ale, albeit they're hard to find outside of the winter months. So I'm quite excited to get to jump into this 2021 cinnamon coconut version. Label art on here, it's got what looks like a kind of a gorilla standing up in a hula skirt smashing some coconuts over its head. Probably hard to see on the camera, but that's what's on the label. So, wax dip bottle. As always, we've got our trusty pointy-ended cap pull here, so we'll just score all the way around underneath the edge of that wax, as we always do, which will let us get good leverage to pry that cap off. Yeah, sometimes you can get the wax right off as soon as you score, but not on this one. All right, cap came right off on first try. I'm just going to move some of that residual wax off the edge so it doesn't drip into the bottle as we pour it. That's pretty clean. We're going to use our all-purpose stout glass here. It works, I call it all-purpose. It works for a lot of different beer styles. A big winter ale, I don't have a dedicated glass for that, but a stout glass works exceptionally well, just as a stout glass works well for a barley wine. So let's just get this poured right in. Ooh, this one's pretty dark here. This is really kind of stout color territory. It's pretty active in terms of carbonation. It's forming a pretty solid head here, but that carbonation might collapse it from the bottom. Time will tell here. Visually, yeah, this is actually pitch black, just like an Imperial Stout. So you don't always get that. Granted, this is a 13% ABV version, so there's naturally going to be more malts added, and if they use a lot of darker malts in their malt bill, then of course it's going to draw out more color. So this one is pitch black. Often you'll see they're a dark brown, almost like a porter color. Sometimes they'll even be caramelly in color like a barley wine. They do kind of run the gamut, but they are a darker beer, an amber or darker beer. So visually it looks lovely. It is active in terms of carbonation. It's settled down a little bit, so it's got a little bit of a head left, but I still think it's just so active it's going to break it. So let's get right up over this for a sniff. Wow. Wow, yeah. That's a big beer. There's a ton of layers of aroma that are in that, and slightly, different than the norm on a beer like this that's also barrel-aged, that I wasn't able to really pick up any aroma as I was pouring it or sitting here. I had to get right up on it, but when you do, what you get is fantastic. The barrel does come through, though it's not as quite as pungent and in your face on the barrel aging on this one. You can smell it. There's definitely that bourbon aroma, but really what I was getting more off of this beer is that cinnamon. Coconut is subtle on the nose, but the cinnamon comes through very clearly, as well as the bourbon and the malt bill. It doesn't smell very roasty, even though it's pitch black, but it smells a lot more like a kind of a classic barley wine aroma. There's a lot of kind of caramelization and toffee and rich kind of buttery kind of aromas coming off of this. It smells, oh, absolutely fantastic. It really does. It's got this buttery toffee kind of aroma mixed with this cinnamon, subtleties of coconut and that bourbon. That's the nose. It's absolutely fantastic. It smells amazing. It looks great. Head more or less settled, but it does have a nice bit of cling and a little pat on top. So let's just jump in and see what the Cinnamon Coconut 2021 release version of this beer is all about. Oh, have mercy. That is transcendently delicious. Oh my gosh. Woo! That is a big, absolutely delicious beer. This is so good. I don't know if my reaction is doing it justice. I wish you could taste this. It is absolutely incredible. I remembered the last versions of the Bee Bomb I had. I see why they're consistently rated as among the best in the world for this beer style. This one's no different. I remember them distinctly. I gotta say, before I even get through all the descriptions and get to my scoring, I'll check my old scores and see. I won't look at them till I'm done, but I gotta say, this one for my money, that cinnamon and coconut blend of ingredients, absolutely fantastic. So, let's talk body and mouthfeel. This is a 13% beer. It feels heavy. This has a lot of weight behind it. It feels like a heavier beer, which is great for a winter ale or a winter warmer. They're supposed to be heavier. Keep you warm, higher ABV, keep you warm during the winter months. Curl up by a fire, have a nice goblet of beer. Absolutely delicious. The mouthfeel on this one is pretty resistant too. Maybe not quite as resistant on the mouthfeel as I expected for the ABV range, but it's still got a good bit of resistance. This one, when you agitate around the palate, doesn't really get creamy or foamy or silky, but you can feel the resistance there. You know, it probably, for what I expected, only missed the mark by a hair of being perfect for the mouthfeel, but it's very, very resistant, very close. Nice big body. So, the flavor profile. It's huge. This is another one of those beers with a huge, intense, and absolutely unbelievably delicious flavor profile. So, on first sip, you don't get the bourbon immediately as like, oh, that's what that flavor is. It is that cinnamon. It's the same thing that kicked off in the nose as one of the dominant aromas is translating into this glass, and it is unbelievably good. Then the bourbon kind of comes in behind that. And yes, the malt bill, there is some underlying richness to it. There is some underlying roastiness to it, but there's no elements of char or any coffee-like undertones to it. Indeed, what I got on the aroma where it smelled almost buttery toffee-like and more caramelization, even though it is pitch black, that is the malt characteristic that came through in the flavor profile, and it's unbelievably delicious. This blend of ingredients, absolutely fantastic, and the bourbon barrel was a great choice as a vessel for aging a beer like this with this combination of ingredients. It's unbelievably good. So, I'm going to jump back in for a second sip. I'm going to let everything re-intensify here, make sure I didn't miss anything, then we'll come back and talk about the finish. What a great, great beer. Bottoms up. Oh, boom, cinnamon, bourbon. A little bit of a booziness that comes down about the 3 to 5 second mark. That's also where the kind of underlying slight roasty edge that does come from the darker malts that are in here pops in, but it's not intensely roasty. It's far more caramelization and kind of rich buttery toffee that comes through. The coconut, just like on the aroma, it's there, but it's kind of sitting underneath the other ingredients. The cinnamon that they put in is big and bold. The bourbon barrel is big and bold. It's got a lot of malt, so there's a lot of flavors that are coming in here intermingling. It does mix quite well. Coconut, cinnamon, not really a combination I would have thought of, but it's absolutely delicious. This is a big, rich, warming beer. Just an absolutely fantastic and well done winter ale here for my money. Fremont's at the top of their game for this beer style. I can't think of any brewer that's done one that I've thought even came close to touching it. I mean, they are just the absolute masters of this style. So let's talk the finish. As perhaps you would expect on a big barrel-aged beer with this bold of flavors, the finish on this one is very long. It's very wet, very round, all the way to the end. The flavors really do coat the palate, even though it wasn't ridiculously thick. It still only missed the mark on the mouthfeel by just a tick for me, and it really does a good job of coating all these delicious flavors all over the palate. What you're left with on the back, it's bourbon and it's cinnamon. That's where it is. There's no underlying roastiness from the malt, none of that toffee caramel. Even the coconut is gone on the finish. It's pure cinnamon and bourbon, and that flavor combination is absolutely incredible. This is yet another world-class example of this beer and this beer style from Fremont. I absolutely love it. I'm going to take my time, sip on this one, come up with my scores. When we come back, we'll get this one ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. This was Fremont Brewing Company's B-Bomb, a bourbon barrel-aged winter ale, clocking in at 13% ABV. This was the Cinnamon and Coconut 2021 release version. Fremont Brewing is based in Seattle, Washington. So starting with the aroma. The aroma on this beer was not super pronounced. It was not one that as I started pouring it into the glass, I could really get it from far away. I had to get right up on the glass and give a slight little agitation. But when it did finally hit me, it smelled absolutely fantastic. You could really smell the cinnamon in particular coming off of this beer and the underlying malt bill, and it smelled really nice. A nice blend of aromas. Overall, really just in terms of pungency and how hard you had to work for it, it was really just high end of average. Aroma gets a 6 out of 10. For the taste, absolutely delicious. I've had several different versions of this beer over the past few years, and these are some of the highest rated of their style in the world, and it's really for a very good reason. These are just absolutely incredible. Honestly, I've had, even though it's a harder to find style, I've probably had 20, 25 different winter ales from different brewers over the years, maybe a little more than that. But at any rate, this is by and away, these B-Bomb versions of this style, hands down the best. This specific cinnamon and coconut, personally, I thought was the best one to date that I've had. Absolutely delicious. Just a rich, layered malt bill, tons of richly roasted malts. The cinnamon really popped out on you. The coconut was a little more subtle, but it just helped to richen everything up, and that combination of flavors was just absolutely fantastic. Then you add in the bourbon barrel, that was just the added cherry on top. Taste, perfect 10 out of 10. For the body, this is a big beer. It's 13% and it feels it. You don't always get that with a winter ale, but it is more common than not. They are kind of designed to be heavier, weighty beers. There's a little boozy sense to them, and they're supposed to be keeping you warm in the wintertime, hence why they're brewed. But the body on this was fantastic. It gets a 10 out of 10. For the mouthfeel, this was indeed a resistant beer. This was well above average for the style, but it wasn't quite as resistant as I anticipated for the ABV range. Only missed the mark by a hair. Mouthfeel, it's a 9 out of 10. For the finish, very long on this one. It was the cinnamon in the barrels that really pushed out the length on this beer, and nice and wet and round to the end, and just a ton of mileage on each sip. Absolutely delicious bourbon and cinnamon just haunting on the back of the palate long after each sip. Finish gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the head and retention, this one did a pretty good job. This is another style you never really know what you're gonna get. For Pour Home, I thought it did a really good job. Above average to be certain. Head and retention gets a 7 out of 10. For the appearance on this beer was really nice. They tend to be a little more dark brown, almost porter color than true pitch black, but this is a much higher ABV than you find in your average winter ale. So, you know, more malts in there, and they clearly added some more highly roasted malts to add to the character of this specific beer. But certainly in range, appearance gets a perfect 10 out of 10. For the balance on this beer was top notch. The barrels, the length of time, the blend of the different winter ales, the 9, 12, 24 month that they use, the cinnamon, the coconut, everything in this beer worked together to make an absolutely cohesive and truly delicious and perfectly balanced beer. Balance gets a 10 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible subjectively, I love this one. Perfect 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of the style. So overall, this beer swept it in nearly all categories. It missed a few points in aroma and a little bit in head retention, although that was above average, and one random point elsewhere. Nothing that really is that critical as to what this style of beer is about and what I experienced. I think it absolutely earned the top points that I gave it. For example, the style, it does get 10 out of 10, which brings the total score on Fremont Brewing Company's B-Bomb Cinnamon Coconut version 2021 release to a 92 out of 100. Guys, this is about as good as it gets for a winter ale. It's a style you can't find all the time. They're a little harder. You have to search for them. But when you do, it's absolutely worth it. And you can age these for a while. These higher ABV beers, absolutely delicious. This was my favorite one to date. If you have any of these, then you know what I'm talking about. This is another one in their lineup that I highly recommend. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live, just turn on the notifications, hit the bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.